Last week, at the Russian Federation's request, Roger Waters addressed the UN Security Council. But instead of speaking on behalf of the Russians, as perhaps they expected when they asked him to speak, he instead spoke for what he called the voiceless majority, as he put it, the 4 billion people of the world, as he says, who are the victims, not the beneficiaries of permanent war. I feel like where we left off last week talking about the Rage Against the War Machine rally, this was a great way to kick off this show. And so let's hear some pieces from Roger Waters' speech. The whole speech was about 14 minutes. We're not going to play all of it, obviously, but here's a few minutes worth that I thought were the really key moments.
What are your goals? What is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Bigger profits for war industries, more power globally, a bigger share of the global cake? Is Mother Earth a cake to be gobbled up? Does not a bigger share of the cake mean less for everyone else? What if today, in this place of safety, we were to look in another direction, to look at our capacity for empathy, for instance? The voiceless majority is concerned that your wars, yes, your wars, for these perpetual wars are not of our choosing, that your wars will destroy the planet that is our home. And along with every other living thing, we will be sacrificed on the altar of two things: profits from the war to line the pockets of the very, very few.
All right, so your wars, calling these your wars, speaking directly to the UN. This is obviously a very, very bold speech that he's giving remotely via video conference. And we're going to let him finish right now. But Jay, do you have anything to comment on for that first little portion there?
Well, yes, Roger Waters is absolutely correct. And when he says your wars, really he's talking to the politicians who allow themselves to be used by the military industrial complex of their respective countries in the West in order to perpetuate these wars for profit. So really, these wars aren't wars of ours. These are wars of the military industrial complex's own doing, and these governments are allowing themselves to be used in order to drum up more profits for these companies, these corporations that are continuously perpetuating war. And in doing so, who are really the victims of these wars? We are the victims of this war. The global majority are the victims. And as the victims, we are being used as cannon fodder in order to push a political agenda, not only to conduct these wars, because every single shot over the bow is a bullet that has to be paid for. Every single bomb that's dropped is a bomb that has to be paid for. But also it's the means to extract resources from these countries, to extract resources from these different territories around the world. And resources aren't just things like lithium and oil and bauxite. These resources are also people like you and me. Human beings are also resources. I remember a Trump administration or Trump regime official talking about what they quote human capital stock. They literally look at us like chattel still in order to be used and to be facilitated to increase profits. So this is what Roger Waters is meaning, at least to me. And so it is quite apropos that he calls it your wars, speaking to the members of this council.
And the hegemonic march of some empire or other towards unipolar world domination. Please reassure us that that is not your vision, for there is no good outcome down that road. That road leads only to disaster. Everyone on that road has a red button in their briefcase. And the further we go down that road, the closer the itchy fingers get to that red button, and the closer we all get to Armageddon. So, back to Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation was illegal. I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. Also, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was not unprovoked. So I also condemn the provocateurs in the strongest possible terms. There, that's got that out of the way. We, the people, want universal human rights for all our brothers and sisters.
Okay, now I just want to pause it one more time there, just to say, because there are people who comment on these videos who have sometimes a difficult time reconciling those two statements that he made, that the Russian invasion was illegal and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms, but they were provoked. There are a lot of people who have a difficult time reconciling those things. Like, what do you mean? If they were provoked, then how could you call it an illegal invasion? And this is sort of what gets to the heart of what I feel anti-war politics are. And I think he does a brilliant job of articulating this in a very, very moving way over this next minute and a half.
So I also condemn the provocateurs in the strongest possible terms. There, that's got that out of the way. We, the people, want universal human rights for all our brothers and sisters all over the world, irrespective of their ethnicity, religion, or nationality. To be clear, that would include, but would not be limited to, the right to life and property under the law. For instance, for Ukrainians, and, for instance, Palestinians. Let that sink in. And obviously, for all the rest of us as well, one of the problems with wars is that in a war zone or anywhere where the people live under military occupation, there is no recourse to the law. There are no human rights. Today, our brief is the possibility of peace in the Ukraine, with special reference to the arming of the Kiev regime by third parties. I'm running out of time. So what do the voiceless millions have to say? They say, thank you for hearing us today. We are many who do not share in the profits of the war industry. We do not willingly raise our sons and daughters to provide fodder for your cannons. In our opinion, the only sensible course of action today is to call for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. No ifs, no buts, no ands. Not one more Ukrainian or Russian life is to be spent. Not one. They are all precious in our eyes.
Yeah, that is a beautiful statement, I think. Not one more Ukrainian or Russian life is to be spent because they're all precious in our eyes. That, to me, is a brilliant and moving articulation of what it means to be a true anti-war voice. And this becomes a matter of not only analyzing the world as it is, where you can say that if a country is provoked and they respond militarily, that should be expected. To me, being anti-war addresses that deeper question of human rights, in which we say war is this vulgar and obscene affront to humanity, which makes human rights impossible because there is no authority that you can appeal to other than the law of nature, kill or be killed. And that is just a bastardization of what it means to be a human being. Chris Hedges put it a slightly different way, but I think equally good. He said, the greatest evil is war. So what he's sort of asking you to do there is to look beyond the two parties and whatever claims they have to make for why their fight may be a justified fight, and start thinking about these kinds of issues in terms of the toll it takes on humanity and how this is such an obscene assault on humanity when this stuff happens. And I have more to add on that, but that was a lot. So, Jay, I want to get your take on that also.
Yeah, when Roger Waters said the provocateurs, he means the United States and NATO,
Of
really.
course, yeah.
Because a lot of times people who have the Ukrainian flag in their bios, what they don't realize is that the United States was one of the provocateurs back in 2014 when it came to the coup, to remove Yanukovych after the United States helped with the coup in Ukraine. And so this was a means to push more arms and expand NATO further and further to the borders of Russia. And so through this, as well as in the region of massacring Russian-speaking Ukrainians, this was really a push that was perpetuated by the United States and NATO in order to make it so that Putin had no choice but to respond. But at the same time, there was an undercurrent or hearings of peace talks possibly happening between Zelensky and Putin. But who intercepted that and made it so that it didn't happen? Well, it was admitted to, by former Prime Minister of Israel that it was undercut by Biden and Boris Johnson.
Yep. And that was in April of last year. So a couple months after the invasion. Yeah.
Yeah. So a ceasefire could have happened. But the problem is that the West does not want it to happen. And this is really a proxy war because they're using Ukrainian lives instead of American lives and instead of British lives to go up against Russia in order to make Russia a puppet state of the West in order to extract resources, just like they have done to many countries in the past. And so because of that, then this is really just imperialism doing what imperialism does on the part of the West. And to call for, the war to be over is really looking at the lives of not just Ukrainians, but also Russians, and really looking at what the West is doing in many other places. Let's talk about Yemen. Let's talk about Palestine.
Well, you mentioned Palestine by name there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so stopping these wars would mean a stopping of trying to extract the resources of other countries for profit. Unfortunately, even though what Roger Waters was saying is apropos and it is admirable, the way that this can actually happen is a dismantling of the systems in place that actually push for these wars for the extraction of resources in other countries. And I think Roger Waters knows this, but he's using all the tools at his disposal in order to call for this. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great answer. And I just wanted to add a little bit because Waters got into this in the speech as well, that his father died during World War II when Roger was only 5 months old. His dad was a pacifist who was then sort of radicalized even to the left of the Labor Party. He became this very sort of militant, anti-fascist communist, and so he enlisted. And he fought in World War II, and he died. He died fighting what was obviously a noble fight, right? It was a fight against the Nazis, right? It was a fight that many say, had to be fought. But that has obviously had a huge impact on him, and I think that has a huge impact on his last statement there, which is that Ukrainian lives and Russian lives are equally precious in our eyes. I mean, this guy lost his father at 5 months old to a noble fight, and you can't fault his father for enlisting to fight the Axis powers. But does that not also raise a question? Is there not a better way to do this? Can there not be a better way to solve these disputes? Does it have to be something as barbaric and as uncivilized as war? Now, the answer that most people have for that is yes, it does. If you look at human history, there is no evidence to suggest that we as a species are capable of moving past war, are capable of transcending violence. And you know what? It's very, very difficult to argue with them, right? That's why, as the song goes, you may say I'm a dreamer, because you sound like a naive, hippy-dippy idiots when you start talking like that. Can't we just do away with all of this, right? There's not really much of an intellectual response that you can give, at least not one that's grounded in the history of the human experience. But at the same time, you know, Roger lost his dad when he was 5 months old. His dad happened to be fighting the good fight. What about the German baby who lost his dad at 5 months old, who was fighting for the other side? What about a Japanese baby who lost his dad when he was 5 months old, when he was fighting for the other side, for the wrong side? Is that German or Japanese baby's life any less precious than Roger's? It begs that question. And that's what informs the question, are we capable of both imagining and then mobilizing to realize a world beyond war? Is it possible? And to me, the conceit that it must be possible, and we have to strive for that. That to me is what informs my anti-war stances. So that's how I reconcile those two statements he makes, where yes, on the one hand, Russia was provoked, but on the other hand, he condemns what they did.
I think, and we spoke to this while preparing, and I think there needs to be a distinction. There's a difference. They're somewhat related, but there's a difference between anti-imperialism and anti-war.
Yep.
Anti-imperialism means that you would not extend your military power in order to extract resources. But if you're being threatened by another power, especially an imperialist power, then are you going to use your means to defend yourself? Let's say hypothetically. Well, not even hypothetically. Look at the DPRK, right? They have a military. They will display their might and their arms in order to make sure that the West does not come to their border and try to overtake their state. But that is used as a deterrent to keep from their people suffering. But the problem is that there is this ideology that we have to go beyond our borders in order to extract more resources for us to come up. This, to me, means that an education needs to take place among the people within the imperial core in order to stop this, so that there won't be war on one side versus war on the other. And so this has to come in the form of, like, for instance, DueDissidence doing the teaching work of anti-imperialism, RBN doing the teaching work of anti-imperialism, and many other channels doing the work of anti-imperialism, saying that no, we should not be going to other countries to extract resources for a material gain, and we should do it by peaceful means. But that means changing the systems in total. And so taking this stance of just being anti-war, would we also be taking the means of being able to defend themselves? Like, for instance, what about, Palestinians? Do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves?
Sure they do. And I would say Ukraine has the right to defend itself, right? But
Yeah.
the question is, as an outside party, right, it's technically we're not much of an outside, but we're more of an inside party than we like to put on, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
But what should the role of an ostensibly neutral party, right, be in this? The role should be to broker peace. And that's what I think Roger was saying there. The role should be to broker peace, not because one side is right and one side is wrong. The role should be to broker peace because, as Hedges says, war is the greatest evil. right? So I think he was making a point that sort of transcends those sort of more, yes, I will admit, more material concerns. User 1990, so you pacifists won't defend your family if some fascists try to kill you. No, of course we would. Of course we would. But I think what Roger Waters is talking about is a sort of transcendent ideological attitude towards these issues, where when a war breaks out, and look, like I said, we weren't on YouTube back then, but when the war started just about 1 year ago, almost to the day now, we came on, we said this could have been avoided. This could have been avoided, and it should have been avoided. If that meant Ukraine agreeing to the terms that Russia laid out, which was independence for the separatist regions, Ukraine out of NATO, and recognition of the Crimea as Russian, those terms could have been met. Is it fair to Ukraine to have to meet those terms? Some say yes, some say no. But the bottom line is, war is hell. War must be avoided at all costs. When a bank robber comes into the bank and he points the gun in the teller's face and says, empty the drawer, give me the money, what do? You empty the drawer, you give him the money. Because that's what stops a bloodbath. And so that's what I think, that's where I think he's coming from there.
Yeah. The problem is that there's profit in shooting the hostages.
Well, of course,
and
yes,
that's
full agreement there.
And from what I see, it's they want the hostages to be shot so that it continuously perpetuates this. So really, it's the ideology of the West that needs to change, and in order for that, a lot of people may cringe when I say this, but revolution is pretty much one of the things that absolutely needs to happen in order for the West to change. And once the West changes that, then really a lot more dialogue can happen when it comes to these things. But until then, we have megalomaniacs that are really running the West. And these megalomaniacs have to be stopped in their tracks. And the crazy part is a lot of people will see revolution as violent, whereas I see revolution as self-defensive. And the thing is that because if you really want to stop the shooter, you may have to take the shooter down. And that means that you may end up having to harm the shooter in order to save more lives. That sounds very bad to some people. But in order to save lives, you have to be willing to take down the nefarious force that is trying to hurt people. And that nefarious force is trying to hurt people by means of extracting resources from them and also using that violence in order to perpetually make more money. So that's the thing that I think there's a little bit of an impasse. There's a little bit of a divide there. And unfortunately, when it comes to anti-war versus anti-imperialism, I think that's where there's a little bit of a divide. It's like, okay, are we willing to actually, like, for instance, we talk about class war. What does that look like? Right? It's like, can there be total pacifism within the realms of of the class war? And it's like, well, no, because the thing is that if you just stand on the sidelines, guess what? The capitalists are going to still keep continuing to do what they can to hurt you. Unless we come up with a way where you don't necessarily have to take them down in that way, there's only one recourse that you have to take in order to do that, is to fight up against it. And this is one of the reasons why you have, for instance, the Black Panthers that took up arms to show the police and say, look, we're armed. You can't come and mess with us. Now, did they go out looking for a fight? No. But if a fight came to them, then they were willing to defend themselves at all costs.
Oh, yeah, no, sure. I mean, I totally understand all of that. I don't disagree with any of that. Where I think Waters is coming from in that speech is that where there are ostensibly neutral parties, where there can be neutral parties, those parties should be advocates for a peaceful resolution to these things to avoid the ultimate hell that is
definitely
war. Yeah.
Please clap.